we have a very special guest with us today, and this has been one of our most requested conversations. Eric Morris is on this call with me, and he's a co-founder of Albany Advisory. We do work together. We have been working together for a very long time. And most of these discussions that we're going to have today, we've had it for over the years. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. So Eric, welcome to Spotlight Fridays. I look
Thank
forward
you
to
very much for having me on. I'm honored.
Of course. Well, this has been due to very popular demand. So welcome, and welcome everyone who is joining us. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time. Hopefully you're having some vitamin D if you're in Melbourne, and maybe you're having some lunch, but let's dive into it. Eric, I'm really looking forward for you to cover a few things that you've experienced in your career. But before we do that, do you mind sharing your background with us a little bit, because a lot of people know you as an ex-CEO of Brand Collective, and if you maybe start with you moving from South Africa to Australia, that'll be amazing.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a long journey. I've been in this industry all my life, all my working life. I feel like it's even been longer than that. But originally, as you can hear from the accent, for those of you who don't know me, grew up in South Africa. Started my working life in South Africa in retail, worked for Reebok in South Africa and started the business there in the post-apartheid era. And then was offered a role to look after Africa, Middle East, still based out of Cape Town, prior to moving and offered the role of looking after Asia Pacific based out of Hong Kong. So went to Hong Kong in 98 and stayed there for 5 years, looked after the 13 Asia Pacific countries, was offered a role in Australia, wanted to come to Australia. It was one of the countries I looked after, and I always thought that was as close as it could be to my home country. I was a little wrong, and we can talk about that later. But started out, was brought here by Maya to start their private brand division, then headhunted out of that to actually start Paz Group in 2005. So it was an idea on a whiteboard. We created it into a sizable organization, listed it in 2014 on the ASX, remained listed for about 6.5 years until COVID time. We then went private again when Larry Kesselman bought the business. On day 2, I think it was, he said to me, okay, we're in it, so who else should we buy? And we bought the Brand Collective business. We then, a little while later, merged the two. And I ran that for just under 2 years, and then decided that after 18 years, it was enough time, and left, stayed on the board there for a while, and have since formed Albany Advisory, sit on a number of different boards, advisory boards, and that's where we are today. So that's in a very quick snapshot of where I've come from.
That's great. Thank you. So that gives us a very good background on you, and it's very rich, of course, and you've steered that ship for a very long time as the CEO. I think it's quite unprecedented that you remained in that seat for quite a long time. So overall, that was about, 18 years?
Altogether, 18 years.
So you've experienced a lot of hardship, obviously, under private equity, changed hands, I think, twice, then went public, then went private again, and anything in between. So during your tenure, what is your advice? How to lead with clarity and confidence when times are tough?
I think, first of all, resilience is absolutely imperative, and you might hear me talk about that a couple of times during the conversation today. But I think what was actually quite interesting is, having run that business for 18 years, I went through not only that, but also moving to Hong Kong just after the Asian crisis and the handover. It was quite a challenging time. So I was very used to running businesses in tough times, whether political times or economic times or anything else. And that's where I was get back to the whole point about resilience. But leading with resilience, I think the most important thing in any crisis is to be able to stay calm. I think those of you who've worked with me or know me well, I'm able to remain very calm in a crisis, think clearly, and I always give an analogy of, could you imagine a group of army generals about to go to war, and if they all start panicking and wondering what's going to happen? Well, the answer is that doesn't happen. They get to that stage because they're very clear in their thought process. Okay, they're able to stay calm. And if you stay calm, you can make far better rational decisions. So I think that's one of the very big overall tips that I've got, having gone through a series of tough economic or political times during my career. I think also really important, and some of you may have seen the post I put on LinkedIn a little while ago, talking about the key things to do in tough times when running a business. The worst thing to do is to actually shrink into oblivion. I think the biggest mistake a lot of organizations make is they feel like times are tough, we just got to cut all our costs in the business, we've got to get rid of all our people. You affect motivation, you affect everything in an organization, and it's very hard to come out of that. In a tough time is actually the best time to reset your business, to reset with people, to reset with processes, systems, and everything else that you've got. So remaining calm, reset the business, continue to invest in the business. Absolutely critical. And I know some of you who are on the call today are obviously in the tech area. And one of the things that's always so critical when it's tough out there, no one wants to invest. Well, if you actually are not moving forward, you're actually going backwards. So look for the right technology. And we're actually in a wonderful time, actually in business and in retail, that there is so much new happening with technology, with AI, with everything else that's going on, that it's a really, really exciting time. And by investing in technology is probably going to make you a hell of a lot more money. Yes, it may actually, reduce some infrastructure costs, but it's going to make you more money in the long term, and that's probably the most important thing. So those are a couple of the points which I think are so critical. And I think the other point is, you've probably also heard the saying, and I've said this a couple of times over the years, is that when the tide goes out, you can see you swimming naked. And when the tide goes out, all your poor performers are exposed. So that's the perfect time to take action against poor performers. I've also had the view over many years that there's nothing worse in an organization than a poor performer who doesn't leave. And if they're a poor performer and don't leave, unfortunately, as a leader, you've got to make those tough decisions.
These are such great points, and thank you for sharing. I can definitely confirm that, and I always refer to you as the calmest leader on the planet. I've seen you going and leading us through many crises, and one particular example that I want to bring up, I didn't think I will, but it just, you reminded me of that day when during the pandemic, PAS was in voluntary administration, and you had to let go of 43 people on that day. I will never forget that Teams meeting when we were all standing together, and I was just thinking, I don't even know how you do it. And you were so calm, and you approached it with a lot of empathy, and people understood. And a few of us were crying, but you led us through it, and we believed that you've got us, and we can rely on you, and we will be okay. And it's exactly what happened, but it was it was a hard thing to do. But calmness, definitely, resilience, I can confirm that. In 16 years of working with you, I've heard a lot of sporting analogies coming from you. I'm not sure if you're going to mention any today, but it's So far, so good. We've got another 10 to 15 minutes to go, so we'll see how we go. But no, thank you. I appreciate that. And the bigger organizations, the more departments and the more people involved. And I would like for us to touch on breaking silos in organization. And I would like to circle back to the technology piece as well. So if you can just provide us with your view on that.
Look, I think it's something that was relatively easier for us when I was running PAS or Brand Collective, because a lot of the new technologies were coming and brought through by Anna, and she'd come to me and she'd show me a great new technology and would realize that this is fantastic for the business, and would call the COO in or the CIO in or the CFO in, whoever it might be, and we'll explain it to them, and we'll power our way through that, get them on board. But we never really had the silos that I have seen since I've been out of the organization. And I think one of the biggest bugbears that a lot of the tech companies are having, and as I said earlier, there's some amazing technology out on the market at the moment, but is who is the right person to talk to in an organization? The big challenge is if you speak to the e-com person, if it's not a senior e-com person, then they don't have enough power in the organization to get the cut through. The moment it hits the CIO, there's a challenge, because I think it's common knowledge that a lot of the CIOs have a lot on their plate and are a little bit adverse to any change, anything new coming in. They've got a bunch of tickets on existing issues in the organization. So that's not necessarily the way to go. And the challenge that people have is they talk to one silo and they are not communicating with all the others. The advice I'd always have is go from the bottom up and the top down if you can. Okay, so yes, sometimes it sits within an e-com or an IT scenario. Go down those channels, but you also need to go from the top down as well. And when I talk the top down, I talk about really the two people in the organization who's really key in decision making, clearly the CEO and the CFO, because if it's something to do with making more money or anything, the CFO's immediately switched on to that idea. The other important part is obviously when presenting and you're getting in the door in an organization, very clearly you have to right up front explain the benefit of what you're trying to do. Throughout my 18 years of running that particular organization, I had so many people coming to present, and it's difficult. Obviously, you can't say yes to everybody because there are so many requests via LinkedIn, cold calls, etc., and you can't say yes to everybody. So first of all, your elevator pitch before you can get into the door to have a meeting has to be spot on. Okay, and once you're in the door, you've got to hit those notes pretty quickly early on, otherwise you lose the person. So I think that's really critical. A question which often arises is, as a CEO, how do you ensure that your team are not operating in silos and that they're aligned? Well, the most important element to that is you have to ensure that their KPIs are aligned. Because the moment your KPIs are aligned, you start automatically being on the same page. And when we have KPIs, those are not KPIs which you set at the beginning of the financial year, and on the 30th of June, you open your drawer, you see what the KPIs were, and you evaluate someone. So KPIs need to be evaluated at least every quarter. And if you actually, as a leader, are on top of your team's KPIs and you're aligned, and here's a perfect example. If you had obviously in the day and age which we're working now about all the new technology in, if you had your CFO, your CIO, your head of marketing, your head of strategy, or your head of digital with a similar KPI, okay, amongst their 5 or 6 KPIs that they have, because I don't believe anyone should have more than 5 or 6 KPIs. And if some of those are aligned, then you automatically start bringing people onto the same page. But again, The most important thing as well about being a leader is being approachable. So I've know so many organizations where their leaders, where the CEO sits in an ivory tower, he doesn't communicate with the team, and they're scared to go and talk to the CEO. I think if you keep an open door policy and you listen to people, you're able to understand and talk more about things which are happening. And again, if it's a new technology, whatever it might be happening in an organization. And that's the best way to break the silos down.
Yes, I agree, and it makes you. We need to humanize the whole the title situation. The fact that you're the CEO of a big organization, and it doesn't mean that you're not human. And I think the whole thing about being approachable, that anyone can walk into your office and have a conversation. I think it's a big deal, and it can eliminate a lot of problems automatically, because people ultimately deal with people they like, and you can't demand transparency and communication and people telling you not just what you want to hear but what actually the truth is if they don't have that rapport with you. And thank you for sharing that. I want to circulate back to those KPIs. Do you think that those KPIs can also help to prevent the people that have their own agendas in the organization, that they're too protective of their roles and they're too scared to lose it, and whatever that might be?
I think it will go a long way to assisting that. But you're always going to have people with their own agendas in an organization. And I think it's up to a leader to be able to understand that and to be able to deal with it, because there's no room. We all know about the old saying, there's no I in team, and there really is none. But I think it's so important that there's an open door and people treat it as a team. And again, Anna reminded me everybody up front about my sporting analogies. You'll never have a successful, whether it's a soccer team, whatever team it might be, who's got a couple of players who've got their own agenda and are not team players. The team suffers. And exactly the same thing happens in business.
Yes, and they're the backbone of the organization, because you spoke about inclusivity, and the importance of inclusivity before in any project. And I think we stuck with that cadence at PAS and later at Brand Collective, where we would include and maybe over-include many people from different departments and overshare to just to see to get the consensus, but then at the end of the day, someone has to make a decision if we are moving ahead of it, with it or not. But at least over including and oversharing gave us that opportunity to give that sense of ownership to every single person, so that we didn't go to them and say, well, we made a decision, go and do it. We'll say, okay, this is what we're thinking of. What does it look like for you with you heading that department? So can you see any negative biases here? Is any gotchas that we need to make sure that we're addressing? So yes, that inclusion goes a long way.
But it probably leads on to, sorry, Anna, to authentic leadership. And if the CEO is authentic and you drive those as your behaviors in an organization, you do end up exposing people who are not authentic and who are looking after their own interests.
Yes, that's very true. So on that authenticity, so what do you believe the difference between leading with confidence and leading with control? Does it have to do with authenticity as well?
Absolutely. And I think authentic leaders, are and leading with confidence, and every leader should have the confidence, otherwise you can't really be a leader if you don't have the confidence. But it's not bullying your way through. It's creating open two-way communication and listening. And if you listen to people and if you leading with clarity and is explaining why you're doing things. Okay. And the worst scenario you have with poor leaders is when the team don't understand why they're doing it. They're doing it because they're told they have to do it. And I hear that time and time again in certain organizations. People are told, you just have to. Okay, and I think that's the key fundamental difference between authentic leadership, okay, with clarity and purpose, and people who are just trying to power their way through.
You're right. And also, yes, you have to have confidence to be a very good and authentic leader. That needs to come natural and maybe needs to be acquired, but you definitely have to have it. But how did you or do you still handle the scenarios where you had to make some tough decisions and um, at the point of not being disliked? They knew that you would be disliked, but someone had to make the tough decisions. How do you manage your own feelings about that? And I know it's not a popularity contest, but it happens all the time in leadership.
Well, the way I always used to do it was really, when there's a tough decision to be made, give it some very serious consideration up front. Okay, go through the pros and cons of the decision. And I always used to say, and people would know me for this, when any tough thing happens, there's always three groups of people. Okay, there's those who celebrate the decision, and let's just use the example here. This is a decision about a person letting someone go in an organization. They're going to be celebrators because the good people know who is not pulling their weight as well. There's going to be those who are ambivalent. This really doesn't make any difference to them, so that's the easiest part. And then I call the last group the mourners. And that's the group that you need to deal with. Okay. And again, if you can actually be very clear in the communication as to why the decisions are made, people will understand it. Because if there's no clear reason why it's made, then you potentially are making the wrong decision anyway. And I think that goes a long way to helping.
Yes, you're right. And we're going back to the same point about if you're authentic, then so is your communication. So everything stems from there. So another question, and apologies to everyone. I have received quite a few questions to Eric beforehand, and I'm trying to power through it. But if not, then we'll organize a part two. But another question that came up with companies that are downsizing and their teams are shrinking, and they get asked to do more with less. How do you keep morale higher and continue to foster that innovation spirit within the organization? What is your view on that, and what is your advice?
I think to keep the morale up, it's really important. I'd say there's two things which immediately come to mind. The first one is what I said a little earlier: explain why. And if you keep explaining why we're doing what we're doing, okay, people understand that. So that's the first one. But the second one is you have to celebrate small wins. I'm going to tell you a story very quickly about small wins, and if we've got time for a quick story, Anna?
We have a bit of time, yes.
Many years ago, I was working with a leadership consultant in our organization who also came from the sports industry, and he was actually a culture and leadership consultant at Richmond Football Club. And at that stage, Richmond were in a terrible state. They lost every game they played. They were really bad. And he came to see me one day, and I said to him, "How's it going with Richmond?" And he said, "Really well." And I said, "How can it be going really well? I look at the results every week, and you guys get hammered every week." And he said, "It's not about the results at this stage. We're in a rebuilding phase. It's about the small wins. And at quarter time or half time or after a game, we'll celebrate the fact that we got into the opponent's 50 so many times. We'd celebrate how many hand passes, how many tackles, and those are the wins, and we're making good progress." And a number of years later, we all know they won for a number of years in a row. So I think that's also a really important point, is celebrating small wins, explaining to everyone why you're doing things. And, I think we all know from ourselves, if we understand why it is what it is, it's much easier to cope. So, and if you've got a couple of bad eggs who are creating more problems, you need to get rid of them. In a big organization, find out who your key lieutenants are and make sure that they are spreading the right messages as well. Because in a very large organization, I think we had about 3,500 people at one stage. It's very difficult to get to everybody, so you need key people getting to the other people. But your bad eggs, you've got to deal with.
Absolutely. Like we say in technology, you have to fail fast, and sometimes you just have to fire people very quickly as well. I think we had this saying that hire slowly and fire quickly,
That's
something along
correct.
this line. Yes.
Yeah.
I'll try to squeeze in a couple of more questions and then more on the personal front. What have been your biggest learnings across your career? And you can name one or two, but if you can share some, that'll be amazing.
I think the biggest learnings, there's many. But first of all, you've got to surround yourself with the right people. Surround yourself with the right people, you're halfway there. Hire for passion as well as ability. It's not only about the person who comes in with a great ability, who hasn't got the passion or hasn't got the right culture. I often say to people, when you're hiring for senior people, it's like hiring for a flatmate. When we're all younger and if we were sharing an apartment, you need to have the right cultural fit. Otherwise, it's hard to live together. And the amount of time you spend at work, you need to be able to live together. You've got to ensure that your values are aligned. Okay. And like we said earlier, take action if it's not right and take it early. So one of my biggest mistakes that I made early on in my career is not taking action quick enough. That was one of them. So those are a lot around the people side. Around the general business side, there's a few key points that I'd always look at there and say, we've got to stay agile. Agility has always been important in business, but I'd probably say that it's even more important now than it ever has been. We're in such a fast-changing environment, you have to stay agile. It's important to be able to have a team which can adapt to change, who are not resistant to change. The other point, and it's a key learning, and I'm going to tell you another story very quickly, but you know the old adage, if it's not broke, don't fix it? Well, sometimes if it's not broke, you have to look at moving it on and improving it. You can't just leave it. And a story which comes to mind, what happened many years ago, if you remember the Metallicus business, we bought the Metallicus business, and it was the most fantastic business I've ever seen. The retail metrics were off the chart. We grew it to a phenomenal business, but we didn't change it quick enough because we had, in that category, we had what we'd call first mover advantage. And by that stage, we had a lot of the big players, and I remember Witchery were one of them, who were trying to copy everything that we did in that category. And we were not moving quick enough. We didn't break something or adapt it. We wanted to keep doing what we did because it was working so well. So I'd often say, look at your business. If you've got a first mover advantage, you've got to keep that first mover advantage for as long as you can, but keep evolving and getting whatever it is, if it's a product or a business, whatever it is, keep improving it. Because by the time the competition catch up from where you were, you'll be way ahead again. So I think that's a really important point. The other one is, often people just talk about sales. Sales. Yeah, sales are important because it provides a bit of scale. But more important than sales is cash and profit. So never, ever forget about that. Focus on cash and profit. And most importantly, and this would be music to Anna's ears, you have to know your customer. Okay. If you don't know your customer, I don't know what you're doing in business because you're doing everything in the wrong way. So really key.
This is a brilliant advice as always. And yes, it is music to my ears because I talk about it all the time. But, I didn't have a chance to circle back on that technology piece. And you are right. The choices are overwhelmingly huge. And sometimes it's hard to pick and choose, but not doing anything is not an option either. But all I wanted to add to it that and how we followed that at PAS and Brand Collective, we were not technology led, we were customer led. So technology has to follow the customer. Then it just makes it easier to make that decision. But Eric, it's been an amazing discussion. I could see many comments coming through and people listening. And as always, I'm very grateful to everyone who had joined us. Thank you so much. And thank you for your input. We're always grateful. And Eric, thank you so much for joining me on Spotlight Fridays. I think this is our, I'm afraid to say, but maybe 19th or the 20th episode. And this is the first time you got an invitation to it, because I didn't think much of it, but here we are. So thank you so much for joining, and always appreciate you, because we work together, and it's been such a pleasure, and I never get tired of you sharing your stories. And everyone else, thank you so much, and we'll see you next week, and have a lovely weekend.